Welcome to 1 Minute to Midnight. I'm Wilfred Cunningham. This week, a leak of confidential documents belonging to Panamanian company Mossack Fonseca continued to reveal how, amongst others, world leaders had amassed fortunes and evaded tax. A ceasefire between the sides in the Yemeni civil war was brokered, and a US general asserted that ISIS had doubled its numbers in Libya. Of course, that's not the only thing that's been happening. It would take 100 people around a decade to count the world population, and everyone has a story. There are so many stories to be told, and so many more that have been lost forever. Stories of fire and wonder, ideas and concepts so ancient they will never be heard of again. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the papers leaked from Mossack Fonseca. On April the 3rd, it began to emerge that a huge amount of data belonging to Mossack Fonseca, a law firm headquartered in Panama, specializing in providing tax services, had been leaked. It transpired that an anonymous source, presumably within, or at least with access to the company, had offered German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung large amounts of banking documents and client information more than a year earlier. And since then, the German publication has shared at least some of the 2.6 terabytes of data leaked with around 400 journalists from 107 media organizations in 80 countries through the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or the ICIJ. So far, very few of the papers have been released, but the consequences have been far-reaching. The Prime Minister of Iceland, Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson, resigned on the 5th of April, one day after publicly refusing to do so. His wife had connections with banks in Iceland that amounted to a conflict of interest, and the paper showed that Gunnlaugsson had taken steps to hide this conflict.
Annars segjulega allt verið gefið upp til skatts frá upphafi. Þannig að þið eruð verið að gera eitthvað tortryggilegt sem að ekki tortryggilegt. Vita félagið í in defense að þú hafðir átt aflandsfélag sem hvaða atriði er að búa til?
On the 6th of April, Swiss police searched the office of UEFA, the Union of European Football Associations, and a member of FIFA's, the International Federation of Association Football's, ethics panel, Juan Pedro Damiani, resigned following information released by the ICIJ, linking Damiani and 3 men indicted in US authorities' investigations into bribery and corruption inside FIFA. The Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, benefited from an offshore fund set up through Mossack Fonseca by his father, who died in 2010, that avoided British taxes for 30 years. Blairmore Holdings Incorporated used bearer shares and avoided tax by appearing to be mostly controlled by non-British people. But papers revealed by the ICIJ suggest otherwise, and that the company is therefore liable to be taxed, possibly retrospectively. Cameron has now released summaries of his tax returns from 2009 to 2015, and faces calls for further inquiries. Although not named in the papers, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been implicated by association. Known friends of his have used Mossack Fonseca seemingly to set up shell companies to channel money earned through government contracts and investments, possibly back to Putin himself. Sergei Roldugin, reportedly Putin's best friend and a professional cellist, owns a 12.5% stake in Russia's biggest TV advertising agency and owns 3.2% of a private bank. On April the 10th, several thousand people in Malta's capital, Valletta, gathered to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Joseph Muscat after leaked Mossack Fonseca papers revealed that 2 of his closest political allies had offshore accounts in Panama. There has been criticism of how the papers have been leaked and which stories have been chosen. Some critics have wondered if some of the reporting has been too assumptive. It is not illegal to operate offshore companies and funds, and many politicians and business people, while being heavily implicated in tax avoidance, have not yet been proved to have committed illegal acts. Some have questioned whether the ICIJ are politically motivated, having seemingly led the break of the papers with stories about Vladimir Putin and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Although the ICIJ have said they will publish a database in early May with the names of more than 214,000 offshore entities incorporated by Mossack Fonseca and the people connected to them, they do not appear to have plans to publish all of the actual papers, which has led to some voicing concerns that the organisation is being selective in which documents it makes into stories. The ICIJ lists its recent funders as including the Open Society Foundation, which is funded by billionaire George Soros, who is a well-known advocate and financial backer of the US left and leftist and other causes. However, the ICIJ is also funded by the Frit Ord organisation, whose central goal is to ensure freedom of the press, and the Sigrid Rousing Trust, whose aim is to support human rights. One prevailing issue of contention, however, is the lack of US citizens who have so far been featured in stories. In February 2016, The Economist argued that Panama was holding out against global tax transparency plans, known as the Common Reporting Standard, or CRS, which, if adopted, may put its offshore industry at a competitive disadvantage. Many commentators have said, as yet few American names have been connected with the Mossack Fonseca leak because effective tax evasion is possible in the US itself, in states such as Delaware. Could it be that the lack of politically very important Americans shows political motives by the ICIJ, or even a plan to bring Panama in line with the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development? Perhaps the Panama Papers are US-led propaganda. But when asked about the lack of Americans, the Deutsche Zeitung editor Kurt Kister told reporters, "Just wait for what is coming next." In other news, both sides in the Yemeni civil war have stated that they will respect a truce due to begin at midnight on the 10th of April. The war between the Yemeni government, heavily backed by Saudi Arabia, and Ansar Allah, who are allegedly supported to some extent by Iran, has claimed 6,000 lives since it began in early 2015. At the time of writing, only a few hours before the ceasefire is meant to take effect, fighting has been reported in Sana'a, the capital. I will try and cover this story in more detail in the future. On the 7th of April, United States Army General David Rodriguez stated that the number of ISIS combatants in Libya has doubled over 12 to 18 months to an estimated 4,000 to 6,000. Rodriguez, the head of US AFRICOM, African Command, said in a briefing at the Pentagon that ISIS militants are coming to Libya from northern Africa and from Iraq and Syria, and some fighters already within Libya have also switched alliances from other groups to ISIS. Rodriguez reportedly asserted that limited US actions in Libya had some success in trying to stop ISIS from growing in Benghazi and in somewhat containing the group in the hometown of Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan dictator who was overthrown in 2011, which is located centrally along the coast of the country. Rodriguez added that efforts in Sirte had been hampered by different militia groups fighting each other. However, it may be difficult for ISIS to become as big a threat as it is in Iraq and Syria because of resistance from such local militias and other groups. In early March, Rodriguez agreed that Libya is a failed state and warned that it would take 10 years or more to achieve lasting stability. He also stated that he'd like to have seen European nations do more during the initial operations in Libya. The similarities between Libya and the ongoing conflict in Iraq and Syria are clear, although the intensity and scale are vastly different. However, earlier in 2016, the United States estimates of ISIS's strength in Iraq and Syria put the number of combatants at 19,000 to 25,000, down from previous estimates which usually ranged from 20,000 to 30,000 fighters. At the same time, it was already being reported that the figure in Libya was believed to be 5,000, so the loss of troop strength cannot be simply attributed to ISIS redeployment to North Africa. So why have numbers shrunk in Iraq and Syria, but grown in Libya? All three countries have been subjected to power vacuums, and as I have stated before, my opinion is that these power vacuums, the likes of which occurred in Yugoslavia during the 1990s, have facilitated ISIS's rise. The circumstances are different though. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad continues to rule and act as head of state, but his power has been crippled. In Iraq, a power vacuum was created after the removal of Saddam Hussein, but Western powers were heavily invested in the country and prevented it from completely fracturing. Even now, with the presence of ISIS, Iraq could be described as being more stable than Libya. After Gaddafi's death, security within Libya quickly disintegrated, and many have argued the slow and underwhelming intervention from Europe and the US allowed the country to break into one ruled by two governments and many militias. Rodriguez has said that decisions to provide more military assistance to the Libyans await a working national government. From 2014, Libya has been administrated by two competing governments, one in Tripoli and one in Tobruk. On April the 5th, the Tripoli-based government, backed by many militant movements, announced it would step down after the arrival of a UN-backed mission that intends to govern Libya. The government in Tobruk, which is internationally recognized, will continue to operate as it has, at least for now. Progress in Libya and elsewhere is slow. ISIS are headquartered in al-Raqqa in Syria. In early March, the head of US Special Operation Command, Joseph Fotel, said there was no plan to take the city. At the end of March, Interfax news agency reported the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Oleg Siromolotov, as saying the US and Russia were discussing coordinating military action to take al-Raqqa. For now, ISIS remains in control of much of Iraq, Syria, and Libya. But the landscape of world politics is constantly changing. So until next time, goodbye, and try to remain calm.